lucrurile s-au schimbat pe scena conferințelor și că nu mai avem garnitura veche, ci vine o garnitură nouă și chiar una mult mai tânără, mă refer la tinerii aceia frumoși, în politică nu prea s-a schimbat mare lucru. Au trecut 25 de ani și în politică nu putem pune nicio statuie pentru niciun politician, cu excepția lui Coposul, care săracul a venit din negura timpurilor. Nu avem niciun politician, niciun conducător al acestei țări care să spune că a făcut ceva cu adevărat măreț pentru România în ultimii 25 de ani. În schimb, avem pușcările pline de prim-ministri, miniștri parlamentari, primari, etc. Și că nu ne vom putea apăra țara și nu vom putea investi în educație, infrastructură, securitate și apărare, dacă nu vom ști să alegem patrioți în loc de hoți, după cum spunea săracul Țuțea. Trebuie să învățăm să alegem patrioții. Și cred că aici și Romanian Business Leaders are un rol. De ce spun asta? Acum 5 sau 6 ani, când am pornit Romanian Business Leader alături de un grup fantastic de oameni cu viziune și entuziasm, eu cred că nici nu ne dădeam seama cât de departe unele lucruri vor ajunge atât de repede. Și am să încerc să vă aduc aminte câteva lucruri. La primul summit, Mihai Marcu făcea o prezentare în care ne spunea cât de rar se pomenește cuvântul antreprenor și cât de rar oamenii de afaceri sunt egal cu succes, cu activitate, cu muncă, cu sacrificii, cu inteligență și cât de mult sunt egal cu hoție, cu distracții, manele, amante, etc. Dar tot ce vedem public. Și atunci spuneam că trebuie să facem ceva să schimbăm ideea de antreprenoriat și oameni de afaceri în mentalul colectiv. Și ăsta a fost unul din rolurile relevante. Tot la primul summit, niște colegi care erau prezenți atunci au venit cu o idee fantastică să facem Ministerul RBL. Mai țineți minte? Sigur, părea o idee absolut stupidă, optimistă, plină de naivitate, dar anul trecut, fără ca să facem nimic în sensul ăsta, un coleg de-al nostru, Marius Bostan, a fost ministrul telecomunicațiilor. O colegă de-a noastră, Sorana Baciu, a fost ministrul secretar de stat la economie. Mulți prieteni care ne-au fost alături în toți acești ani, în toate proiectele noastre, și mă refer aici la Marius Ghinea, Dragoș Păslaru, Claudiu Vrânceanu, au fost miniștri în guvern. Este un semn. Un alt semn s-a întâmplat de curând anul acesta. Un domn cu care noi am interacționat în ultimii 2-3 ani, fără ca să-l implicăm în fundație sau în activitățile noastre în mod deosebit, dar am mai interacționat, să spunem, instituțional, la nivelul task force-urilor și întâlnirilor de guvern, mă refer la Florin Gianu. A fost primul și singurul ministru care și-a dat demisia în urma marilor manifestații de stradă, spunând că ceea ce se întâmplă intră într-un conflict cu principiile lui etice. Și că nu poate să se întâlnească cu colegii lui din comunitatea de afaceri și să mai poată vorbi cu ei. Cred că RBL începe să influențeze și fără să-și dea seama. Și noi, ca și comunitate, facem niște lucruri care se văd în societate. Și cum am făcut toate astea? Noi toți împreună. Cum le-am făcut? Păi le-am făcut prin proiecte. Am făcut prin Vreau să fiu antreprenor, în care 13.000 de copii s-au întâlnit cu antreprenori din RBL și în care unii dintre ei au ales ulterior să facă facultăți de antreprenoriat. I-am văzut ieri pe scenă. Am făcut acest lucru prin ateliere de antreprenoriat în care câteva sute de mici firme antreprenoriale, IMM-uri, au trecut prin cursuri informale de scolarizare și leadership alături de oameni din RBL, de antreprenori cu experiență și succes din RBL. Am făcut-o prin proiecte precum Antreprenorești, prin Repatriot, Merito, etc. Toate aceste proiecte încep să aibă o influență fabuloasă în societate. Până la proiectul Repatriot, nu s-a vorbit despre repatrierea oamenilor români la nivelul la care s-a făcut după aceea. Sau colegii mei din Repatriot au văzut toată Europa, s-au dus pe banii lor la Roma, la Madrid, la Dublin, în Germania, în Italia, au ținut conferințe. Iar anul acesta s-a ținut un summit repatriot în România, cu 200 de participanți la Palatul Cotroceni, cu participarea primului ministru Dacian Cioloș și cu o sesiune de workshop-uri la Banca Națională alături de Isărescu și echipa de la Banca Națională. Eu cred că asta este o recunoaștere fabuloasă a ceea ce Romanian Business Leaders și colegii noștri au reușit să facă. Așa încât astăzi, la sfârșitul zilei, este sesiunea de proiecte, dragii mei. Este cea mai frumoasă parte a summitului Romanian Business Leaders. Romanian Business Leaders trăiește prin summit, care este inima lui, și sângele care sunt proiectele Romanian Business Leaders, care se fac cu ocazia summitului și care trăiesc și se dezvoltă pe parcursul întregului an. Și acum aș vrea să spun un ultim moment de aha. Ieri m-am întâlnit cu câțiva dintre colegii Romanian Business Leaders, care acum o săptămână, 10 zile, au fost în Silicon Valley să vadă ce se întâmplă acolo. Au vizitat mari firme din domeniul tehnologiei și inclusiv Universitatea Stanford. Deci Romanian Business Leaders s-a dus la Stanford. Astăzi, Stanford vine la Romanian Business Leaders prin profesorul Hanușek, invitatul lui Florin Albeș, pe care aș dori să-i invit pe scenă pentru următoarea sesiune. Vă mulțumesc tuturor și vă
Bună dimineața tuturor! Chestia administrativă la început. Panelul care urmează va fi limba engleză. Și o să comod destul de repede limba engleză. Așa că o să invit pe toată lumea care are nevoie de căști. Există traducere. Cine are nevoie de căști, la recepție sunt. Deci puteți să, cine are nevoie, acum să o facă. Pentru că o să schimb repede cu... Ok. Alina îmi zice să luați și buletinul cu asta. Cine nu are pașaport, nu? Sau un card. Ok. So, o să trec pe engleză. I will repeat something about Coalitia for Romanian Development. Coalitia is structured on several task forces. One of them is the Education Task Force. Most of the people here in the hall, we are business people. So, could be a social business, could be, let's say, a profit-based business, but we are most of us, except our dear teachers, we are business people. So when you talk about, let's say, business and education, generally we think about the border between the education system and the business. That means university graduates or eventually vocational education graduates. So at some point, Marika, she took the lead of the education task force of the coalition. And at that stage, she started to insert topics related to education, but not related to universities necessarily, or to the vocational education. Was about gymnasium, was about primary school, or even preschool. So a lot of people got surprised that we business people, Coalitia for Romanian Development, who are focused on business development, the framework, we are touching these kind of points. Why? These are not of high interest for us. Later on, started about 1.5 years ago, we started to read some papers written by Professor Hamšek and different people, different researchers of the world, touching different topics, and one of them was the relationship between education and economics. So today we'll touch that kind of link. okay, and will unveil somehow why we have touched, or Mariuka with her team touched within the task force topics like gymnasium, primary, or even preschool. Okay, so let me introduce a little bit Professor Hanušek. Professor Hanušek received his PhD from MIT. So he's a graduate of MIT. He used to teach at Academy of Air Force, United States, at Yale University, and at Rochester University. He is frequently contributing to Wall Street Journal on topics like education and economics. In the 70s, he introduced the concept of evaluating the teacher's effectiveness based on, let's say, student learning gains. Seems to be a very simple proof. Teacher effectiveness and student learning gains seems to be obvious. However, if we are taking a closer look at our education system, we are not measuring the effectiveness of teachers based on the student learning gains. But it's not that reason for which we somehow hunted Professor Hanušek to join us today. The main reason is Professor Hanušek is one of the most reputed researchers in the world on the relationship between education and economics, on the relationship between the quality of the education and the economical sustainable growth. So let's welcome Professor Hanušek.
Thank you very much for having me here. I should say at the beginning, there are going to be two language problems here. First, I'm only going to speak in English, but the second one is maybe more serious, and that is I'm an economist, and economists often speak in different languages from everybody else. So recognizing that, as I go along, if you have questions about what I'm saying, just raise your hand, and we have some microphones here, and we'll take questions that you have if I confuse you. If you're really upset with what I'm saying, you might hold that to the end, and then we can talk about that. So what I'm going to talk about is partly motivated by the United Nations, that in September of 2015 passed the Sustainable Development Goals that you may have heard of. After many years of discussion, all of the nations of the UN voted to ratify goals, 17 of them, that start with the idea that we should eliminate poverty by 2030, that we should eliminate hunger, provide for good health, provide for an environment that is sustainable. But what I'm going to argue is that out of the 17 goals, there are only 2 that are the primary goals, and the rest follow on from the first 2. The first one is that development equals economic growth, and that there's no way to meet the other goals of eliminating poverty and hunger and so forth without having the resources to do that, and that comes from economic growth. The second, and why I'm here today, is to say that growth equals skills, that the skills of the population are what counts in the long run. And that's the message that I'm going to try to build up today.
Professor Hanušek, you just touched these ones. Isn't Romania already doing well on these ones? I remind you, by example, that looking to the international Olympiads of mathematics, we are still in top 10% of the world, and there are more than 100 countries joining that international Olympiad every year. Or if we talk about the students' attendance of the schooling, it's really high compared to other countries. So aren't we doing well?
So that's a very good question. Let me come back to that, because the normal measure of how well a country is doing is, are the kids in school? And are they getting sufficient schooling? So let me come to that very quickly. Let me first give you the conclusions, though, for the talk, so that if you want to go out and get a cup of coffee, you can at any point. The conclusions are simple. Development equals growth, and it's natural in today's world where we have still the leftover parts of the 2008 recession, we have Brexit, we have Trump, we have the turmoil in your own country today. We have all of these things that in the short run grab all of our attention. But the problem is that if we only look at the short run, we're going to be in the constant problem like today all into the future. That we really have to not neglect the long run. And the long run comes from developing the skills of the people of Romania, and that largely falls upon the schools to do their job. What I'm going to suggest later on is that the value of improvement of your schools is enormous. That all of you have really underestimated the value of skills. Secondly, I'm going to suggest that improvement is possible, that there are ways to do this, but that it takes a steady, long-run commitment to improving the schools. So that's my main message. Let me come back to the issue of where Romania is now. The usual way that people and economists over a long period have looked at the issue of economic growth is there more human capital? Is there more years of schooling that people are completing? And the reason for that is, if we draw a simple picture, I'm going to give you a few of these pictures, so let me walk you through what's on this picture. If we have a picture here that is basically years of schooling on the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis is long-run growth rates. Long run means the average growth in GDP per capita between 1960 and 2000. So it's over a 40-year period. Now it says conditional, and conditional is something that you all recognize. Behind this, we've taken into account the starting position of each economy in 1960. Why? Well, if you start behind, all you have to do is copy what everybody else in the world is doing. And you can grow fast by copying what other people are doing. If you start ahead, you have to invent new things. But once you take that into account, what you see is this positive relationship here between years of schooling, conditional years of schooling, conditional upon where it's starting point, and growth rates. And this is what drove much of the UN's previous interest in getting everybody into at least completing lower secondary schooling. And on that grounds, here is a picture of all of the EU countries, starting from Bulgaria at the bottom of the percentage completing lower secondary schooling, and going up to, in black, tied at the top, is Romania, where, in fact, students stay in school in Romania for a long period of time, relative to all of the other EU countries that fall off from there. Now the problem is that that's not the right answer. And I'm putting a picture up here. It's not really complete advertising, but if you want to go to Amazon, you can get this book by my colleague Ludger Woosman and myself that lays out this case that in fact growth depends upon the knowledge. This book, The Knowledge Capital of Nations, says that long-run growth depends on skills, that I've told you before. And the knowledge capital of the nations represents the learning that goes on, not necessarily how long people are in schools. And what I'm going to show you simply is that the international math and science tests that you're used to now, the PISA tests, are in fact a good proxy for the learning that goes on. What are the PISA tests? I think all of you know. 15-year-olds in a random sample of 15-year-olds in now about 70 countries around the world are presented with a math problem where somebody makes a math problem in the local language and walks it around the world, and we can judge how well people can solve a similar problem, and we can get a ranking of countries. Well, it turns out that that's very valuable. Here's a similar picture to what I showed you before, but it takes all of the past test scores of countries. Countries have been taking these international tests actually since the mid-1960s, and so there are a lot of these tests that are around, and we now get every 3 years the PISA test and every 4 years the TIMSS test. What you see here is a positive relationship between the average test score in a country and the growth rate, looking a lot like what I showed you before. It's again conditional upon the starting point of countries. Two things about this graph. One is easy to see, and that is most of the countries fall close to this line. On the bottom left-hand corner, you see Peru and South Africa and the Philippines. The top, you see Singapore and Taiwan. So all the countries fall very close to this line. Secondly, what you can't tell so easily from this line, but that I'm going to describe to you, is that this is a very steep line. A very steep line. Knowledge has a huge payoff in terms of growth. Now let's go back to the original one now to come back to how well is Romania doing. The original picture I showed you years of schooling against growth rates, and that's the same picture I showed you before. Let me show you the same picture if I take into account what people learned on the math and science tests, the PISA test, and the measure of that. What you see is it's a perfectly flat line. There is no relationship between just adding years of schooling and growth once you take into account what people have learned.
So, Professor, I'm coming from high tech, so I know, but as an industry, we are monitoring the digital economy and society index, which is a kind of dashboard the European is monitoring. And one of the indexes I'm looking at is the number of STEM graduates, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So me as an entrepreneur, I should say, when we talk about measures, so this is our principle, but when we talk about measures Romania should take, I should focus, by example, on increasing the number of graduates of STEM, scientists, engineers. Is it correct? What should we do?
So that's a very good question. I've shown you the average scores for the students in the country, 15-year-olds. But you could get to a higher average in several different ways. One way is that you could just produce rocket scientists, that STEM graduates that are ready to be engineers and scientists. This is sort of the model of India. India produces all of the people from their IITs. The other alternative is to make sure that everybody in the society gets up to a minimum level, which is what the United States tried to do with No Child Left Behind. Everybody get up to a minimum proficient level. So the question is, does it matter how we do this, or should we focus on one or the other? If we look around the world, we see that countries have done very different, have very different patterns of learning. Here are four pictures. They are the distribution of test scores. I'm not sure which year. I think it was 2006 on math. And I've got Belgium in the top left-hand corner. Belgium, the dashed blue line is the OECD average. It looks like what we see across all the OECD countries. The black line is Belgium, and you see that they've got a fairly high average score, but a very broad, wide dispersion, so that they have a lot at the top and a lot at the bottom. If you move over to the left, any graph I give you has to have Deutschland on it because of my German co-author. So you see that Germany has higher than average mean, but also a wide dispersion, which is what led to, in Germany, they talked about the PISA shock, when in 2000 they learned that their students were so widely dispersed in terms of performance. The bottom left-hand corner is the European hero, Finland, which has a very high mean and a very narrow distribution, everybody getting the same point. And the bottom bottom right-hand corner is the USA, which has not a particularly high mean, but a wide variation. So you can see this, if we showed you developing countries, if I showed you Brazil, you would just see a long right-hand tail of this distribution. What does it mean for growth? The answer is that both having more rocket scientists and having a broad education, a good education level for everybody is important. Moreover, they interact, so that rocket scientists, and the STEM people that you're going to hire, are more effective if they have a strong workforce, a very skilled workforce.
I just touched at the beginning that in the task force, we talked about, let's say, gymnasium, primary, preschool. Okay, for now we see the distribution of the, let's say, of the marks and so on. Then you mentioned PISA test, and we assume that building for getting good PISA tests is about gymnasium and primary school. So is there really, do we see something between, a relationship between improving, changing the school and the growth, as we mentioned initially?
So that is a very good question that many of you probably ask. Is this a causal relationship? Does getting better schools cause more growth? It could very easily be. It could very easily be just the opposite. If you think of years of schooling, if a country grows faster, it has more money, and it buys more of everything, including more schooling. Along with cars and TVs, it buys more schooling. Or alternatively, when we compare countries, it's very easy to see that there could be a lot of omitted factors. There are cultural differences across all of the countries of the world. There are differences in the regulations of the labor market, of the capital market, many of the things that were discussed here. And there's different institutions about the security of property rights and so forth. This is a question that, as a scientist, I've spent a lot of time on with my co-author, trying to ensure you that if you improved your schools, you would get better growth in the future. We can't be completely convincing on this. What we've done is to try to eliminate some of the most obvious things that could intervene between improving the schools and growth. Now, let me just give you one simple example to try to convince you of this. I said that these tests have been given over a long period of time. They've been given since 1960. So some countries, like the United States and the UK, have in fact taken these tests multiple times. And we can see whether their scores in each of these countries is improving or falling. Now, if you believe my story, it should be the case that if the scores are improving over time, the growth rates should also be growing over time. So let me show you, for the OECD countries, who are the ones that have taken these tests the most, we can draw lines across their scores. This is really drawing a sort of line from the score in 1975 to 2000. So you see at the top of this line, high scores in Japan and Korea, but relatively flat. They aren't improving, they're relatively flat. In the middle, you can pick out in red Finland, which shows you why everybody is looking to Finland. They increased their scores dramatically over time on these tests. If you go farther down, you get to Germany and the US that are kind of low and not changing very much. And then nobody has ever disputed the fact that Italy is at the bottom and falling. Okay? So now if you believe what I'm saying, the steepness of these lines should relate to growth rates. So I can draw a line through the annual growth rate of every country, a similar line. And if I see a steep slope in the test performance, I should see the growth rates going up over time. And here's the picture. These are the countries. The horizontal axis is the steepness of the test score lines, the trends in test scores that I showed you in the past, and the other is the change in growth rates. What you see here is that all the countries fall in the right quadrant. The countries in the top right are ones that had steep increases in performance and their growth rates went up. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you see Italy and Japan and Germany and France, where in fact the lines were not very steep or falling, and their growth rates have been falling over time. So that's just suggestive evidence.
We got it here. So the countries which have the best trends in improving the test scores have the higher growth rates. However, we are in Romania. A lot of us are complaining about not having highways. Like the highways infrastructure is really poor. So we understand that schooling is valuable. The question is, when you have a limited amount of money, where to invest? So do you have a kind of data about how important, how valuable is schooling compared to other things we should do?
So you're going to have to fill in the blanks on how much it costs to build highways, but I'm going to give you how much you can gain by improving your schools and try to convince you that this number is probably larger than the highway number, all things. So along with my co-author, there's a book that you can actually get if you want, just going to my website or the OECD website, where we try to estimate the value of improving schools for 76 countries. Those are the countries that have taken the PISA test recently or the TIMSS test, and we know where they start, and we've projected out. And what we've done is to take the available evidence from the growth and test score relationship and use that to project out what would happen for a set of reforms. Now, I'm going to give you two reforms here that say, start today, work on your schools, and get to a better state 15 years from now, which corresponds to the Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to assume that the growth holds just like it did between 1960 and 2000, the picture I showed you in the past. And I'm going to project out growth rates, but one thing I have to tell you, I mean, as I project out growth rates, it takes a while before we see the economic gains from schooling today. And some of us aren't too concerned about what the economy looks like in 2090. So given that, we're going to weight today a lot more heavily than 2090 or in the future. I'm going to discount these in the future. For those of you who know, I'm going to calculate the present value, which means I'm just going to add up the growth and put it in terms of today's currency, today's dollars or euros that we have. And I'm going to compare it to a growth that's assumed in GDP per capita to be 1.5% per year. You could get more than that for a while until you start to develop, but that's the average for the OECD, and the average for the EU as a whole. I'm going to calculate the gains over 80 years, which is the life expectancy of somebody born today. Okay? So what am I doing? Here's a picture of what I'm doing. Starting 2010, I've put on the bottom corner here, 2010, we started an improvement program for our schools. Well, what happens in 2015 if I started in the past? Well, nothing happens, because the kids are still in school and they aren't in the labor force, and you have to wait till they get into the labor force. But after they've gotten in the labor force and become a substantial part of the labor force, history suggests that growth will lead to a higher GDP. So the vertical axis here is the percent that GDP per capita, or GDP would be higher than GDP with no change in the schools. So no change in the schools is 0 on this graph, and increases after that. And so what I've drawn here, the dark line is what you would get out of the picture I had before. The other lines are just on there to suggest, well, there is uncertainty in this, so in the back of your mind there's a little bit of uncertainty. But what I'm doing is going out 80 years, starting in 2010 when I did these calculations, it goes out to 2090. And what am I going to do? I'm just going to add up how much larger is GDP with improvements in school compared to no improvements in school. Okay? So it's in present value terms. So I'm going to look at two quick examples for Romania. One is getting to universal basic skills. What do I mean by that? I mean that everybody completes at least lower secondary school, if not more, which you're already doing, but that they get to the lowest level, level 1, on the PISA test. Now, what's level 1 on the PISA test? This is a test for 15-year-olds. So here's the problem. If you want to write this down as I go, I'm going to give you a math problem that indicates level 1. I flew here from California. I paid $2,800 for my ticket. The exchange rate between the dollar and the euro is 1 to 1.1. How much did my ticket cost in euros? So you can see that it's not really a stretch problem, you would think, for a 15-year-old to be able to solve that exchange rate problem. 42% of 15-year-olds in Romania cannot reliably solve that problem or similar problems. So I'm going to project out what would happen if instead of 42%, everybody could at least solve that level of problem in math and science. Second, I'll give you an example of what happens if you reach the schooling level of a near neighbor, Slovakia, and give you the estimates there. So let me give you the answers. Here's what you get for all the EU countries. This picture has countries on the horizontal axis. The line at the top, the solid line, is the percent of students below basic, and that's red on the right-hand axis. So you're going to get to Romania, that's the black mark there. 42% of Romanians cannot reliably solve that exchange rate problem. More Bulgarians cannot solve that problem. But you're at the extreme. And the red lines, the bars of the red lines, is how much would GDP be increased in present value? What's the present value of the added growth? And what you get out there is, for Romania, is something very close to 300%. In other words, the value summed over the future of added growth from getting everybody up to the level of this exchange rate problem is 3 times the current GDP. Or let me give you 296% of the current GDP. It's 1.194 trillion US dollars. Or, in other words, you can think of GDP as, on average, being 6.3% higher out into the future for the next 80 years. Now, none of these numbers make any sense, right? So let me put it into something that makes sense. What makes sense is that every person in the labor force of Romania for the next 80 years can on average expect 12% higher salaries every year. Let me go on quickly to what happens if you got to the Slovak Republic. This graph that nobody can read out there, it lines up all of the countries that have taken the PISA test. And you start with the Dominican Republic, that's right on the far right-hand column, and you get over to Shanghai and to Macau and Hong Kong and Finland on the left-hand side. The dark solid line is Romania. The striped line is the Slovak Republic. So the question is, can you make that little jump up to the next level by getting the Slovak Republic? What's that worth? That's worth almost 3.5 times current GDP in Romania to get up to the level of Slovak Republic in 15 years. And counting for people being slow to get out into labor.
It's interesting, Professor. So this is very important. So when you talk about, let's say, improving the people, let's say, the building skills or the schooling, let's say, we get this kind of economical result. And we should remember that it's about, in our case, it's about 12% higher paychecks every year if we should reach that kind of PISA score test. So, but you know, we are in Romania. So all the people here we are complaining about the schooling here. Okay, so the question is, we believe that the schooling is not changing. You listened, Dragos, who said that the politicians pool didn't change a lot, and the education system is with them. So how could we do that? Is it possible to change the school?
So we know it's possible if we look around the world. Here's some pictures just of various countries. You can assume that every country in the world wants to improve its schools. Some do and some don't. So you see at the very top was in yellow is Japan, which was flat for a long time and recently has shown improvement in its schools. Finland, which had this enormous growth that everybody's happy with, has actually fallen off a little bit in recent years. You see Germany has done pretty well, particularly after the shock of the PISA scores in 2000. And then you have countries like Sweden that have just fallen like a rock. And you can assume that everybody's trying to do better. The one thing we know is that this is not a simple problem of just adding more money. What I've plotted here is over time on the horizontal axis for the last 20 years, what's the change in expenditures per pupil in each country. All the countries are identified here. And the vertical axis is how much did the PISA scores improve with the added expenditures. What you see is that you're not going to draw a very steep line through this picture. You're going to get a flat line. That some countries have spent money and gotten results. Other countries have spent money and gotten nothing out of it. You can see at the bottom in the center is Sweden, which has spent some more money, but they got horrible results. So it's not a simple answer.
So I know that was a kind of misconception I had, together with Mariuka, that if we invest a lot in education, so the money could be the problem, could be the root of the cause. But that's you're stating here that not true. That there are other routes, or let's say other measures we should take. Which one is the most important one?
Let me say at the beginning, it's not that money never matters or can't matter. It's that you shouldn't expect it to matter if you don't do anything different. Okay? And so let me look at the answers. What can be done? I think of that spectacular program at the gala last night. And the first answer here is improve teacher quality. Get more of the 10 Merito teachers, a higher proportion in the group of teachers. The second answer that we have is to improve teacher quality. And the third answer that we have is to improve teacher quality. That's what the research around the world says, is that, and let me be very clear here because sometimes people misunderstand. It's not that the current teachers are causing the low performance. The performance of students is a complicated task. It involves parents and the other students in the class and the teachers. But it is the case that the teachers have the leverage, the power to, in fact, improve the performance of their students. And that's why I emphasize the teacher quality, because that's what, as a government and as a country, we control, is what the quality of the schools looks like. I have to add one other note. I often don't add this on. Teachers are one element, and the administrators, the principals, and the headmasters in schools are another element that has to go along in step.
Thank you, because you just came with an additional information here. Let's say, I know have been some efforts last year to improve the quality of the administrators. We call principals here, okay? The school principals. And now we feel that it's a go-back effort in improving the quality of the administrators. But you're talking about improving teacher quality, and I know what you want to say. So, you know, we have trade unions in Romania. I know what you think about the improving teacher quality, but when you talk about trade unions, they believe something that can be improved, but probably we believe something else. So,
let me talk a little bit more about what is meant by teacher quality, because we often use that term, and we use it in governments. Let me explain here. The talk from now on has no data from Romania. It has data from the United States, it has data from the UK, from around the OECD. I will explain what we know from the schooling and the studies that have been done in the United States, which are much more extensive than any other place. And you can make your judgments about whether they apply to Romania or not. But let me give you what we know in the United States. The first is that all of our standard measures of teacher quality are unrelated to how effective the teacher is in the classroom. It does not matter whether they have a master's degree or not. People with a master's degree, on average, are just as effective as those without a master's degree. It doesn't matter how much experience they have with an asterisk beside it. And that is, during the first year or two of teaching, people get better. They learn. But after the first couple of years, a fifth-year teacher, on average, is as effective as a 25th-year teacher. It doesn't matter whether they're fully certified by the rules that are applied in the United States or other countries, and what courses you need. It doesn't matter where you were prepared, whether you were prepared in a teacher's college or a regular university, or where you were prepared. And we don't know systematically how to provide professional development that will, in fact, lift teachers up. Now, that having been said, there's a lot of evidence that at least at the ends of the distribution, the performance is observable. And that is, by which I mean the very best teachers, the ones that were on stage last evening, are known to everybody. The students gave testimonials they knew. The other teachers know. the principals know, and what stood out among the 10 people that got awards last night was the one teacher who came up with a bag made by the janitor who knew what the quality of the teachers were. There's no question in anybody's mind who are the best teachers and who are the worst teachers. There's a lot of confusion in the middle, but not at the extremes. But what this says is that you can't just sit in the Capitol and write rules of what a good teacher is. You have to actually use the information about the quality of teachers that we know. So, how do you do this? Well, the economists normally would say something like, we should align the pay of teachers with their performance. In other words, the 10 teachers who were on stage last night are probably way underpaid. Way underpaid. You want to pay them more, not because you expect them to work harder. You want to pay them more so that the young people that look like them stay in the classroom and don't go off to all your companies and all the tech firms. But you want to keep them in the classroom. So that what that takes is that you have to have a good evaluation system, and we can come back to that later. But you have to evaluate teachers on what we know and have a system that gives you that information. You want to reward success, and here's where I usually get into trouble. You also want to consider what I would call the zero option. There are some teachers that probably should not be in the classroom. They are not unknown. I mean, everybody knows, every parent, all of you look like parents, so pretty close. There's no question in your school which teacher you do not want, as long in addition to which teacher you do want. So let me give you an experiment. Let's take the 200,000 teachers in Romania and line them up according to their effectiveness. So we'll start here in Bucharest and line them up going north to, I don't know, Transylvania. My geography is a little bit bad on how far the 200,000 teachers would stretch. And then we're going to do an experiment based upon, again, what we know from schools in the United States, in the UK, and a few other countries about how different the best and the worst teachers are. I'm going to just do an experiment that says, let's replace the bottom 1% of teachers with an average teacher. Not a star, just an average teacher. Or let's replace the bottom 2% with an average teacher and see what happens to performance. So here's a conservative estimate of this. The horizontal axis shows you the percent of the teachers that we replace with an average teacher. And the vertical axis shows how much performance on the PISA test would improve according to what we know about the difference between teachers. Now the way to look at this is that I've shown you how far ahead of Romania Slovakia is. That crosses this axis at 5%. So if you thought of taking the bottom 5% of teachers, which are known to everybody, and replacing them with an average teacher, the evidence suggests that the schools would rise, the students' performance would rise to the level of Slovakia. Slovakia was present value of 3.5 times the current GDP of Romania. Now these are conservative estimates because there's other plausible estimates say, well, maybe there's bigger differences among teachers. And if I put in the sort of other end of the distribution, well, it might only take replacing the bottom 3% of the teachers with an average teacher to get to Slovakia. Or the 5% might get you to Spain, which is a lot more on the estimates of impact that I showed you. Now, I've talked about incentives directly to teachers. It's hard to put those into place, but we can think of other things that come into play. You can think of changing some of the institutional framework. One thing that is absolutely necessary, in my opinion, to get any of these reforms is to have a good accountability system. You have to know where you're at before you know whether you're improving. So you have to measure student performance and see what happens to it. Given that you know what schools are doing and how well the kids are doing in every school, you want to let local schools have a lot more flexibility in how they do it, in their choices of who is teaching, how they're teaching it, and so forth. And then what we see internationally, at least, is allowing more parental choice of schools, more competition, where the parents can choose what school their kids go to, has an impact. And then finally on my list here, that I don't have up here, but I've been emphasizing how you might change the K-12 schools, providing better preschool for the children of the country also is an important element, because many of your parents are not providing the level of education at home that will support high-quality schooling. So, development equals growth. Growth equals skills. The value of school improvement is enormous. Or another way to look at this is, people often say, when I talk about changing teacher quality, they say, everybody realizes that a good teacher is important, and there is usually a but. But it's really hard to change the quality of teachers. But it's really hard to change. One way to read what I've just given you is, this is the cost of not changing. The cost of staying the same is maybe 3.5 times the current GDP if you could get to the level of the Slovak Republic. Improvement is possible, we've seen in different countries, but it takes a strong and lasting commitment. You can't just keep changing policies every year.
Thank you, Professor. We have some, I missed to mention that Professor Hanušek is with the Hanover Institution of Stanford University now. Hoover Institution. We have a few minutes more, so waiting for some questions. We have a question there.
Hello, I'm Radu Kirvase from Săptămâna Financiară. In terms of curricula, you just mentioned changing every year the system. In terms of curricula, the content of the subjects, what are your comments? Thank you.
I think we know that you have to have strong standards of where you're, and goals of where you're going that are built into the curriculum. So you have to have strong goals for what students should know. Now, sometimes people use the curriculum of how do you teach it and what's the exact path for that. In my estimation, and this is a little bit radical, it doesn't really matter too much. What matters more is the quality of the teacher, and quality teachers can get to where you want the students to be in a variety of different paths, a variety of different ways of teaching and of presenting material. So strong goals and standards are important. How you get there is more up to the individual teacher, in my opinion.
Thank you. Christy?
Cristian Hatu. Many experts think that to increase the quality of educational system means to develop skills like critical thinking, complex problem solving, creativity. Why do you think that these skills are so important? Thank you.
Well, it's quite clear in a changing world, and a changing world is what you get with economic development. In a changing world, you have to be able to adapt to different problems, to different incentives, and different issues facing you. In my opinion, this has been a very active debate in the United States and throughout much of Europe about shouldn't we emphasize more critical thinking rather than more basic skills and like standard algebra? Shouldn't we have students developing it themselves? And in my opinion, developing critical skills means that you have a strong basic knowledge going into a new problem and that you can recognize the elements of the problem and then think about how to do different things. So it's not that we start at second grade and having students in second grade figure out what fractions mean. It's that we develop those skills, and then after a while, when they've got the basics of Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and into some calculus, then they can solve the physics problems that we don't know.
Yeah, we have a question here.
Hello, my name is Ligia Deca. I'm working at the Presidential Administration, and we have a project looking at how to better education. One of our biggest debates was indeed how to better teachers. And you mentioned that preparation doesn't matter, experience doesn't matter, a number of factors that we, in fact, in Romania are discussing a lot. You said results and student feedback matters. Now, I get that in terms of, output-based evaluations. The question is, how do we prepare them, in fact? What are the preconditions in order to actually get good teachers, even though there is no consistent, statistical data on it? What's your experience?
I sympathize with your problem. The research doesn't give a lot of background for these debates. These debates are very intense in the United States, by the way, I should mention. And it's probably true if you somehow aggregated up the votes on both sides. I'm in a minority position on this. If you weight by truth, I'm in the majority. But if you just add votes, I'm not. And what I think is, in my opinion, is that it's very hard to predict who will do well in the classroom by either how you prepare them or just a simple interview. Once they're in the classroom, it becomes quickly obvious who is going to do well or not. So my opinion of what should be done, which is a very difficult policy position to take, is that you should allow a lot more people the opportunity to try teaching and to keep the ones who do well and suggest to others what other jobs they might take. Now, there's a lot of turnover around every place in the world. I mean, every industry in Romania is undergoing lots of change. Lots of people go into every other industry in Romania, decide whether they're good at it or whether they like it or not, and leave and go to other industries and other occupations. We act as if teaching is somehow different, and I don't think it is. Is that it's hard to know what you're good at and where you enjoy working when you're 16 years old. And so we shouldn't count on that as holding for teaching any more than other places in the economy.
Other questions?
I wanted to ask you, just a second.
Okay.
I have a very specific question. Andrea Nemens, I'm from GMP Advertising. I wanted to ask you, because you are talking about evaluation system for the professors, for the teachers, I wanted to ask you, what's the ratio in the evaluation for the emotional intelligence for the professors? Are they evaluated taking this into account?
I think that comes into account. I wouldn't do it separately because we don't quite know how to measure it. But it's obvious if you have an evaluation system that it ought to, in part, take into account what the students have learned, their gains in learning over time, but it in part ought to be a more objective measure, but by supervisors or other teachers that will necessarily take into account the range of attributes of teachers and what they're doing, what they're providing to their children. So the ideal evaluation system to me would involve both measures of the test performance of students on a sort of standardized way, plus other evaluations by supervisors and others.
Okay, eu Sesiunea Margasoiu, the network. We all know that the system could be any system, social system, economic system, move from point A to B following a curve pattern. But sometimes, you know, it jumps from 0 to 1 in split seconds. You know, that's, we have wars, you know, crisis, revolution, whatever, we name it. That's a disruption. If we have data within your research that can prove that such disruption might change things overnight instead of waiting, you know, 100 years. Thank you.
So economists have actually looked at this question. There was in some of the early work on trying to decide why some countries grew faster than others, there were countries that had revolutions, there were countries that were subject to all kinds of other things. And my projections obviously don't take into account the fact that 80 years from now, all 76 countries might not exist even. So I'm giving you a historical pattern. But the historical pattern that's above all of these disruptions, other than the permanent ones, if you do away with countries and so forth, suggests that it comes down again to the skills of the people in each country. And so that even countries that have had revolutions, if they have a high-skilled population, they come out of it pretty well. If they have a low-skilled population, they don't. So that obviously these other things are important, and you get big jumps. Now, the other place where big jumps are important that I didn't emphasize, and that is to the individual. If I go through schooling and all of a sudden technology changes, as we've seen in the last 20 years, am I going to be prepared for that? Well, in my opinion, you're prepared for that if, in fact, you have the skills that allow you to adapt, to learn new things. If you don't have those skills, you're in trouble. That's why I am not such a fan of the general vocational education programs that exist in many countries, because they lock in a set of skills that might not be there 15 years from now or 20 years from now, that you need the ability to learn and change. If you have a vocational education, you have to somehow build in what is euphemistically called lifelong learning, the long-term learning of people, and we haven't figured out how to do that very well.
Do we have more time? Question. Okay. So, sorry, we have two first, and you will be the third. Sorry. First.
Hello?
Okay, the one with the working microphone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Julian Serban. I am tech entrepreneur. I get that your research focuses on individual scoring in the PISA test. However, in growth and in business, we need teams and collaboration. And we have an issue, a cultural issue here in Romania. And I'm asking if you have any research linking the skill of teamwork and variety with the growth instead of individual testing results. Thank you.
There's starting to be research on that that is in a very early stage of the research. People have looked at various social and emotional skills, including teamwork or what some people call grit, the ability, the persistence in things, and others. It's a research area in which we're trying to develop measurements. There's a little bit of suggestive evidence that these things are important. What we do not understand very well is how correlated these skills are with cognitive skills that I've been emphasizing, the cognitive skills on these tests. Secondly, we don't know well whether we can change those characteristics very easily in the classroom. Can you in the school teach these skills and change them? So my answer to your question is you have laid out a good research topic, but not a public policy topic yet, because we do not have enough information yet on both how to measure the relevant skills and to how we can improve them if we want to.
Can I add something here? There is a research made by Professor Urlich team, University of Michigan, talking about, let's say, the impact of the performance of an organization, adding the culture to the individual talents. And they are proving that the performance could increase by 2 to 4 times, just looking to a team as an addition of the individual talents versus individual talents plus culture. Okay. Next one.
Have you considered or studied or considered studying what motivates above average teachers? And I guess it's not pay, but what else is actually motivating them?
So we really don't know that. Last night, we'll go back to the 10 teachers last night. The 10 teachers last night obviously were internally motivated to do well. Somehow that came about. And frankly, just providing them with more money wouldn't make them work harder. And so offering more money to the high-paid teachers is not to get them to work harder. I think almost all teachers work very hard, in my opinion, harder than I do. And just providing more money isn't going to get them to work harder. It's more on selection. How do we motivate them? I really don't know. I really don't know.
Hello, my name is Ștefan Pălărie, Școala de Valori. There was one thing in particular that I really liked about your presentation, the concept of zero option. And recently, actually just last year in the summer, we had examinations for the first time in the history of Romania, I think, for headmasters of schools. And there were about more than 300 cases in which nobody showed up because the actual headmaster knew if they would show up, they would fail. So there was no candidate. And we also have probably similar situation for teachers. So my question was, did you witness or you faced several similar cases in the United States maybe? What do you do when you cannot really implement a zero option? And how can you medium term prepare for fixing it?
So the zero option that I brought up would be that after you've had a chance to observe the teachers or principals, you know some shouldn't be there. They're the ones that are closest in line to where we are now that have to be replaced. And there are a few examples of that in the United States that have actually proved to be very effective. Washington, D.C. in the United States has the worst schools in the nation. And in that school system, 5 years ago, they introduced a different evaluation system that included both student growth on test scores plus a very large component of supervisor and external evaluations. People at the top of the performance for 2 years in a row could get their base salary increased by about 40%. Substantial. People at the bottom of the scale for 2 years in a row got fired. And they fired 500 teachers, they rewarded 1,200 teachers. And if you look at the performance of students, Washington, D.C. is the only large city in the country that performed better on standardized tests in all grades and all areas. Other school systems, one in Dallas, Texas, that I'm starting to study, we don't know the answer completely, but they're making these changes. One of the things that happens is that when you go to a system like this, you in part encourage people at the bottom of the distribution to look for other jobs. And you find that they look for other jobs more frequently, and you actually don't have to fire as many teachers once you give the information and they see that they're not going to do well.
Should add something here. So what we learned from Professor Hanuszek is keeping the status quo when you know it's not a good shape, it's one of the worst decisions. So keeping the same people is not the smart decision one. Anka, and after that, Dragos. Thank you.
Anka Harasim, American Chamber of Commerce. We are looking in for all these reforms to the policymakers, to the government mainly. Since we are in a meeting with the business community, the question is if you worked in any way or saw a contribution from the business community in successful reforms in education.
In the United States, the business community has not been very effective at improving the schools. They have generally put relations with schools into the community relations part of the business and move it away from the things that business people know how to do, which is how to run businesses and how to get better performance. The effective interactions of businesses with the schools, I think, are to provide leadership at some level, particularly on the evaluation of performance and the relationship between rewards and treatment of schools and personnel and the outcomes of the process. That's what you see in business. You're looking at a profit and loss statement and relating that to the actions you're taking, but that's not what happens in the schools. And businesses can, in fact, provide that leadership in that area, as opposed to going out and offering everybody a new iPad, which has proved to be a very ineffective way to improve the schools by just dispersing iPads to everybody.
Before going to the question of Dragos, I remind you that at 2:45 p.m. there is a working session with Professor Hanuszek in Timișoara Hall. So you're all invited to join. Please, Dragos.
Dragos Anastasiou from the German-Romanian Chamber of Commerce. First of all, thank you very much for your speech and the presentation. You told us a lot of things, interesting things about teachers and quality of the teachers and improving the quality of the teachers. But we know that the children are living between parents and teachers. And I wonder if you have some research on the influence of the parents, because sometimes I think first of all we should discuss about improving the quality of the parents. And in countries like Romania, where we have problems with the mentality, old mentality, new mentality, probably this is the first thing that we have to solve.
How do I answer that? Yes. The answer is yes.
Thank you very much.
The reason I'm standing here today is when I was doing my graduate work at MIT, I was looking for a topic to write a PhD thesis on, and there was a major study of United States schools by a sociologist, James Coleman, who wrote a federal government study called Equality of Educational Opportunity. This was a time of our intense civil rights movements in the United States, and so the Congress required him to do this study basically to show that the schools in southern United States were worse than other places. What he did was test everybody in the country. He tested 600,000 students in 1965, which was a time when we had no iPads, we barely had hand calculators, and somehow he managed to test all these students and analyze the data. That long story builds up to say that he concluded that the only thing that mattered was essentially the family and the parents, and that schools didn't matter. That's what got me into this whole business, because I thought that was a crazy answer. It couldn't possibly be the case that we pay so much attention to schools, put so much money into them, and they don't matter. And so that's what's driven my attention till now. It is absolutely the case, all of you know it, and all of the research supports it, that families are extraordinarily important, that families with kids from disadvantaged families, low income, low educated families and so forth, come to school less well prepared on average than those of all your children coming to school. And that is something that we have to take into account, but we don't know how to do that governmentally. We do not know how to intervene in the family and make better parents. We know a little bit about it, but in general we don't. So that's why I have emphasized the powerful role that teachers have and schools have to, in fact, overcome lack of education in the family and to substitute for it. That's the argument behind expanded preschool, is to get to kids, disadvantaged kids earlier. Preschool doesn't do anything for basically middle-class parents and middle-class families because they're already providing that background. Preschool has shown to have a powerful impact on kids from disadvantaged families. So it's just a statement about where the government and policy can have a leverage.
Sorry, we have to stop here. Don't forget, 2:30, 2:45, Timișoara Hall. I think we learned some phenomenal things from Professor Hanušek, and we'll still have the opportunity to learn later on in the afternoon. So thank you and big applause for Professor Hanušek. I invite you now on the stage Anca Harasime and Andy Dumitrescu, which will tease you about the next section of the forum, of the summit. Thank you.
We'll continue in this room the discussion that Professor Hanušek started, and we'll bring the conversation in the labor market, trying to identify some of measures that we can take under the Romanian business leaders programs.
Thank you, Anca. So I will rise a little bit too much, maybe the expectations for the next session. And it's somehow continuing with what we've seen from Professor Hanušek, because he said the value of school improvement is enormous, and we will have a young entrepreneur who contributed to this, telling about how he did it. And we'll talk about technology, meaning how all the industries and our businesses will change and how our lives are changing. And the last point of Professor Hanušek was improving, so we'll have some ideas as well of how we can improve. Yeah, so let's see each other together. In Timișoara, yeah? Looking forward to meet you there.
Timișoara Hall, not Timișoara.
pam, pam.
Încrederea clienților se obține greu, dar prin expertiza pe care o dovedim, prin răbdarea cu care suntem alături de client pe perioade mai lungi de un an de zile chiar, rezultatele la un moment dat se concretizează. În general avem acorduri de parteneriat pe 3 ani de zile. Dincolo de 3 ani de zile putem spune că suntem deja împreună la un drum lung.
Categoria UI Entrepreneur of the Year din cadrul celei de-a 3-a ediții UI Entrepreneur of the Year România 2016 este Cristian Covaciu Ipec.
Este o nouă energie în România. Sursa ei, oamenii. Oameni cu un soi de spirit, vibrație, aură. Nu prea știm cum să-i zicem, dar o simțim cu toții. În orașe, la muncă, pe stradă, în fiecare casă, în fiecare zi. Vrem să contribuim cu energie simplă pentru cei care au acel ceva special. Pentru că ei o transformă în energie pozitivă pentru noi toți. Energie simplă pentru energie pozitivă. Enel.
Încrederea clienților se obține greu, dar prin expertiza pe care o dovedim, prin răbdarea cu care suntem alături de client pe perioade mai lungi de un an de zile chiar, rezultatele la un moment dat se concretizează. În general avem acorduri de parteneriat pe 3 ani de zile. Dincolo de 3 ani de zile putem spune că suntem deja împreună la un drum lung.